Started.
Right.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're just going to get started in a second. There are some folks that are continuing to join, so we'll get started in just a few seconds. Welcome to this session. We're glad that you're here. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this session. We hope that you're enjoying the Early Math Symposium so far. My name is Paul Reimer. I'm the Executive Director of the Ames Center for Math and Science Education in Fresno, California. And I'm joined here by my colleague, Alejandra Alvarez, and together we'll be presenting today. We're excited to be with you and hope that you enjoy the session. As we get started, please feel free to say hello in the chat or aloha in the chat. And it's great to see so many of you here, and we're excited to share what we have with you today. Along the way, if you have questions, feel free to post those in the chat. We'll do our best to monitor those and respond to those. In addition to that, we do have a Q&A session that will be going on at 1 o'clock today. And so if you have other questions or ideas, you want to talk more about the session content, we invite you to join us today at 1 o'clock in our Q&A session for some follow-up. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. Our presentation today is called Invitations to Play, Designing for Family Engagement Through STEAM Exhibits. And we're excited to share this work. It's part of the Count, Play, Explore initiative, or the California Early Math Initiative. This work has been going on for quite some time. And in this aspect of the work, we've been designing family engagement exhibits that are installed in local schools or early childcare centers or community centers. And today we want to share a bit of that work and invite you into that and see how it might connect with the work that you're all doing and ways that you might think about implementing it into the future. So to get started, we're going to have an invitation to play, or at least an invitation to talk about your play right off the bat. So I want to invite everybody to remember a time that you engaged in a playful activity with someone of a different generation. Could be older, younger, and take a moment to think about that time. In particular, who was involved, what were you and others doing, and how did you feel? And after you've thought about it for a few seconds, I want to invite you to just post just a phrase or two about that play experience in the chat for all of us to see and to share together. So far, we're hearing about sports among family members. So much fun. And even just some words like joyful, dramatic play, teenage girls and husband playing games when they're home from college, kite making with a dad. There's a lot of deep connection to others, dancing, laughing, creative, playing characters with kids at home, volleyball, drawing pictures with a grandma that was losing her memory and the drawing helped her, playing pickleball with seniors at church. It's so wonderful to see so many different playful activities, and also how predominant various emotions are and feelings in these activities of joy and playfulness and meaningful activity. I even love some of the things here that you've described, actions like giggling, laughing, being silly. We can see from our own experiences that that play and playfulness is an activity that can cross generations and can cross different kinds of activities. It can be something that feels very serious in some ways, can also be very silly and very playful. Some of the work that we're doing is really trying to take some of these natural interactions that happen across generations, from very, very young to very, very senior, and to think about ways that we could foster more of that in more deliberate and more intentional ways through exhibits. And our exhibits are, we call them interactive exhibits. And they're installed for about 6 to 8 weeks in a public space. And they are meant to evoke all of the kinds of things that you just posted in the chat. They're meant to evoke intergenerational play. They're meant to evoke fun and laughter. But at the same time, there's interesting materials that are strategically placed in these exhibits that tend to encourage participants to explore science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, what we call the STEAM areas of learning. And so while there's play and there's fun involved, there's also a lot of learning involved as participants get to try different materials and explore different things together and create or construct things collaboratively. Each of our exhibits also has signage that has prompts with questions or things that caregivers or young children might explore. There's an emphasis on co-play, so it's not necessarily facilitated by the adult for the child. It's not only for the adult. It is really intended to bring multiple folks from different generations together in playful activity and learning. And we have a lot of literature connections as well. We know that stories and storytelling and reading and literature are integral parts of play and integral parts of what we do together with folks from different generations. Each of our exhibits also has a guide that we've developed. The guide, you'll get to see a little bit more of the guide when Alejandra presents a bit more just in a few minutes. But just as an overview, our guides are helpful for organizations or agencies who want to install one of these exhibits. The guides help describe ways to design the exhibit, the kinds of materials you might need to use, interactions to look for, ways to really support that kind of co-play that we know is valuable for children's learning. It's also valuable for relationship building. So I want to just also now take a bit more time to sort of highlight some of what has prompted the design or influenced and shaped the design of these exhibits and the kinds of family engagement activity that we're looking for. First of all, we come from a perspective that learning is a social and a cultural process. It doesn't just happen by oneself. It happens in interactions with others. It's very social, which means it takes all of our mind, all of our body, the ways that we interact. It's also very cultural, deeply embedded in cultures and practices and traditions. In particular, we're drawing on 3 contexts that have been described by Rika Rose Roque out of CU Boulder and some of her work with family creative learning. The social context is an important one to consider. It has to do with the relationships between families and within families. The material context is what's the stuff, what are the tools and the space that are part of that engagement experience. And then thirdly, the emotions. I loved reading all of the different emotions that you described in the play experience at the outset of our session today. And the emotional context is important because it really draws us in as humans as we think about and express the ways that we're feeling, whether it's joy or pride or even some anxiety in learning something new or engaging in a particular kind of activity. So just to talk a bit more about these 3 contexts, the social context, that those relationships within families and between families, and the facilitators who may be in the exhibit or around. The exhibits intend to really empower children to lead the activity with caregivers co-learning and co-playing along with children. And one of the things we found that this does is it really helps to shift the roles of novice and expert across ages and experience. Throughout our work with these exhibits, we've seen children taking the expert role and adults feeling a bit like a novice as children guide and direct and help adults to sort of understand their goals and what they want to do in the playful activity. And thirdly, the exhibits really intend to make visible participants' goals and their processes, how they're involving each other in the activity, what they're trying to accomplish in the play, and really how they're creating or constructing the kind of thing that they're looking for. In particular, some of this work has really sort of explored the roles that parents and caregivers take in this kind of activity. And this is from Roque's work. How do we consider parents and other adult caretakers' roles in the design of the interactivity? Parents are learners too. But even in family-oriented experiences, children are still positioned as the primary beneficiaries, and parents are sometimes marginalized from engaging as learners. Parents can be as curious, insecure, and playful as their children. As one mother shared, "I'm not just a mom." Parents can play many roles, such as collaborator, project manager, and resource provider. The second context is material context, and this involves the tools and the space that make up the exhibit. We try to use familiar tools and familiar materials, things that might be considered a pantry of ingredients, things that you might find at home, things that you might find in everyday experience, such as cardboard or straws or things that are familiar, but they might be used in unfamiliar ways. This is important because the kinds of materials we choose can really shape and encourage the exploration that we want children and their families to experience. In particular, we can really set the stage for learning about mathematical concepts such as patterning or spatial reasoning, or science concepts such as wind and wind resistance and airflow. And then third, we really want these exhibits to help reshape or reimagine home and community spaces as a rich context for exploring and play and in learning. And thirdly, the emotional context, the feelings that are communicated and expressed. We really hope that these exhibits encourage and spark joy, and that they spark wonder, and they spark surprise and curiosity. When you see families engaging together in playful ways, or being curious about how something works, or trying something out together, you automatically see all of these affective parts of learning and relationship coming into the scene. And it's a really wonderful space to encourage the connections to meaningful family experiences as well. We encourage families to tell stories, to share their stories through the things that they're creating throughout the exhibits. And really, one of the goals that we have is that families would express creativity, that they would explore their own emotions, and through that process develop empathy and further cooperative skills with others within their family and others within other families in their community. So now that we've looked at these three contexts, I want to invite you all to sort of look for some of these things in a family engagement experience. We don't have videos to show, but we have some photos. So we're going to just now engage in a photo visual exploration. I'm going to share a photo and with three sort of ideas for you to think about and reflect on. The first is, who is in the photo and how are the bodies positioned in relation to others? It's really the social context. What's going on there with the relationship, both with bodies and the people that are there. Second, with the material context, what materials do you see in the photo? Who's holding those materials and how? Where are the hands and eyes directed? Are they at the materials, or are they at what the materials can do, and that sort of thing. And then the third context, that emotional context, what are each of their facial expressions? What emotions might they be expressing? I encourage you to think about these three contexts as you view a few photos, and just post some things in the chat. What are you seeing related to these three things? You might respond to just one of the three questions, but take some time to reflect as you look at the photo and post your observations in the chat. Thank you for posting some thoughts. We see with this shadow play, we see wonder, we see some excitement. Some of the bodies seem like they're in motion or in movement. And we also see sort of that all are positioned where they can see. You can see also too that at least one child is looking at the hands of the adult, but another is looking at the actual shadow. You can see on the faces some smiles, some enthusiasm, some connection, curiosity, and engagement. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much for those reflections. Let's share a second photo. And again, with the same questions. Who is in the photo? How are bodies positioned in relation to others? What materials are in the photo? Who's holding them and how? Hands and eyes, where are they directed? And then what emotions might be expressed? Yeah, we see some kind of loose materials. We definitely see some recycled goods. I don't know if you see there's a strawberry basket there, as well as some other kinds of maybe foam blocks, some cubes. Mm-hmm. There could be some imagination. There's a focus on the shadow, sense of wonder. And also the design of this activity allows for bodies to sort of be open. At least faces are sort of around facing each other, but also, like, there's a comment there that no one's in front of one another. There's sort of a side to side. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah, fantastic. We have a third and final photo to explore together. Who's in the photo? How are bodies positioned? What materials are in the photo? What emotions might there be? Mm. Mm. So here we see a little bit more of cooperation. There's some playing together. There's exploration. There's quite a few different sort of uh, actions that might fall into the STEAM realm. We think there's some mathematics going on, perhaps some counting or measuring, some stacking, observing, facilitating. Maybe some are actively engaging. Hmm. Yeah, wonderful observations. When we take a photo that is just a snapshot in time, and we look at the social context, who's involved and sort of how are they involved. We look at the materials. What are the things, the stuff that people are using to express their ideas or the things that they're interacting with, as well as the emotional context. How does this activity spark emotional engagement, cooperation, empathy, joy, wonder, perhaps frustration or challenge in some ways as well? We're able to really think about the kinds of experiences that we can design for families that draw intergenerational participants into an experience with different roles and with different ways to support each other as they learn and play together. I'm going to turn it over to Alejandra at this point, who is going to talk a little bit more, engage us a little bit more in one particular exhibit that we have installed, which is light and shadow play. So Alejandra.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so an example of an interactive exhibit that we've used before is the light and shadow exhibit. And essentially, what participants are doing in this exhibit is they are collecting and using a variety of different items around them to observe the shadows that they make. And so just like we love to do here at Ames, we are all going to do a little bit of playing together to get us starting to think about, what are the different components of this light and shadow exhibit. So in just a moment, you're going to have some time to do some light and shadow play yourself. So the first thing that you all are going to do is you're going to gather some materials. So it is light and shadow play. So we need a light source, right? And this could be a flashlight that you have. It could be the flashlight on your phone, on your smartphone. It could be a, thank you, Paul. It could be a lamp in the room, right? That you're in. And then we also need a white backdrop. Okay, so that could be a white wall. That could be perhaps a white bookshelf that you have. That could be a white piece of paper, an 8.5 by 11 white piece of paper that you have, right? And then you need just some common objects that you have around you, right? That you have easily accessible at your desk or table that you're sitting at or in the room that you're in. Then you're going to want to minimize some of the other light sources in the room. It doesn't have to be, your room doesn't have to be pitch black, but perhaps it just means closing the shades or some curtains or turning off some other lights in the room if you can. And then you're going to make some shadows, right? So set up your light source in a way, perhaps you're in one hand, you're holding the light source, and in the other, you're exploring using other objects to make shadows against that white backdrop. If you're able to set up your light source so that it is standing up on its own or leaning up against something so it doesn't fall over, great. Yeah, explore. We're going to just use a variety of different objects that you have access to make some shadows, any shadows that you want. And so as you're playing today, notice the shadows that you're making. Notice the shapes that you're creating as you perhaps move the light around or move the object around. And think about these prompts or questions that are on your screen. Does your shadow remind you of something you've seen before? Does your shadow remind you perhaps not of a specific object you've seen before, but of a feeling or a mood, right? The shadow that you're creating, you can interpret it as something very literal, right? Or perhaps something a bit more abstract. So play around with the different shadows that you're making, and then we'd love to see what you're creating. So on the screen there is a QR code. And when you scan that QR code, it's going to go to a Padlet. Or you can use the link below there to open up the Padlet on a computer. And on that Padlet, we invite you to post a photo of a shadow, or perhaps several photos of several shadows that you're making, so that we can see the different types of shadows that you all are creating. Feel free also, as you post your photo, to write a little comment around what you're thinking around these questions on the screen. Write a little comment about what your shadow might remind you of, if it's a specific object or a feeling or a mood that it creates against the white backdrop. So we'll take about 6 or 7 minutes to kind of play around and make some shadows, and then we'll definitely invite you to post those if you can. So we'll be looking out at that Padlet to kind of see the different types of shadows that you all are creating. And we'll leave that QR code on the screen for you for a little bit so that you can come back to it as well. And if you can't really think of anything specific that your shadow reminds you of, that's okay. Post a photo anyway. It doesn't have to be of anything specific. We're just curious to see the different types of shadows that you're able to create with those objects that you have. Yeah, so if you, for whatever reason, aren't able to take a photo and post it to the Padlet, definitely feel free to share some of your observations in the chat because some folks are already doing that. So thank you. We'll give folks perhaps another 2 minutes to explore the shadows that they're creating. And if you can, share them on the Padlet or in the chat. Mm-hmm. Mhm. So some folks are noticing some, as they're, moving the object around, the ways in which it changes the shadow, right? As we move further, the object further from the light source, the shadow seems to be getting smaller. As we're moving the object closer to the light source, the shadow seems to be getting bigger. So let's go ahead, Paul, if you can go ahead and screen share that Padlet there so that we can all take a look at some of these great photos that are coming up. Awesome. Really interesting. So as you are as we kind of take a look at some of these photos and some of the comments in the chat as well, we're noticing here how really we can create shadows with anything, right? With so many different types of materials. We don't need to buy any extra materials to engage in this type of play, right? We can use resources and materials that are all around us. Some of us are even using our hands and our bodies, right, to create interesting shadows as well. So thank you. Also noticing how the different shadows that we're creating, right, are really dependent, the way that we see them, the way that we interpret them, right? The things that we see in these shadows, it's really open-ended, and really depend on, the different perspectives, right? There's a lot of different perspectives that one can take on just one shadow. What one person might see in a shadow might be completely different from what another person sees in the shadow, which leads us to how we can really, really use our imaginations in this type of play. Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing some of your photos there. Really interesting to see the different kinds of materials you all are using, as well as the different types of shadows that you all are creating. And so as you can see, this light and shadow exhibit, it's very open-ended, right? It's an open-ended exploration of the art and science of light, right? Participants, learners, they are exploring and investigating big ideas like cause and effect, right? What happens to the shadow when I move the object? Or what happens to the shadow when I move the light source, right? A lot of cause and effect exploration in this play. As participants are rearranging light sources, as well as the physical materials that they're using, and making those observations as they are moving and manipulating those objects. So as we have developed this light and shadow interactive exhibit, one of the things that has really supported the exhibit is the incorporation of children's literature. Whether it is this specific light and shadow exhibit or any of the other light and shadow exhibits. The books, right, when we put them out, whether we put them out on a in a bin or on a bookshelf, right, or we use certain illustrations from the books, they provide context for the play, right? They provide inspiration for the play. And it's also just a really fun and engaging way for both the adults and the children to learn and explore together, right? Through these books and through these stories. So here's one example of one book that we've used in this exhibit. And essentially the way that we've used this book is we've used a specific illustration from this book, right? So as I said, books and their illustrations can provide inspiration for the play, right? So if you look in that photo there on the right, behind those children, we have this book, this illustration displayed in the exhibit. And so as the children and the families are visiting the exhibit, they can see these visuals, and it can really inspire them to get started in their play. As you can see in that illustration, there's examples of using hands to create shadows, right? And so right away, the children and the families are seeing those illustrations, and they are trying out some of those shadow shapes, and then perhaps trying some of their own, right? Another example here of a book that we've used in this exhibit is the Oscar and the Moth book. And so here you can see in the middle of the screen some participants that were engaging in this exhibit. They were inspired by the story. They were inspired by the characters, Oscar the cat and the moth, right? To create their own shadow characters, right? Their own shadow story. And so if you look closely, they used paper there and some stands to create Oscar the cat, right? And some tissue paper and some pipe cleaners to create the other character in the book, the moth, right? So we can really see how the books can support the exhibit in many different ways. So so you all have access to, in the resources tab at the bottom of your screen as part of the resources that we're including in this session, you all have access to a copy of the Light and Shadow exhibit guide. There's a lot of information in here. So we definitely invite you, if you're interested in perhaps exploring how you might set up a similar exhibit or this specific exhibit, we invite you to spend some time after our session looking through that. And so we're gonna kind of go through some of the parts of this guide, but there's a lot of text in there, so don't feel like you have to read quickly through all the text as we're going through the slides, because again, you all have access to this guide. So one of the things as you are thinking about how you might perhaps set up this exhibit, this specific exhibit, is thinking about space, right? Where is the space that you might, in your specific context, in your specific environment, that you might set up an exhibit like the Light and Shadow exhibit? So, for example, with the Light and Shadow, you might want to have like in the picture there, a low table that's at child height. Or perhaps, if you want to invite participants to use their whole bodies to create shadows, perhaps you might want to have an open floor space against a white backdrop, right? So really thinking about your particular space and the different types of, play that you want your participants to engage in, whether you want them exploring light and shadow on a table, or perhaps in more of an open floor space. You definitely want to consider in the rooms or in the environment that you have, thinking about the other lights in the room, right? Depending on the light sources that you have, you may not need to have a really dark room because the light sources might be strong enough. But you may need to minimize at least some of the other light sources, whether it's being able to block out some of the sunlight from the windows, or some of the lights coming from the other rooms that you might be nearby. So those are some things to consider, whether you're working on a table or in an open floor space. You're going to want a white backdrop, whether it's paper or a wall, for example, and if there's ways to minimize some of the other light sources. Some other things to consider if you're thinking about how you might set up this exhibit are what kind of light sources, right, do you want to use? In this guide, at the end of the guide, you'll see that there are a list of resources where we've provided some examples of some of the light sources that we've used that have worked really well. So, whether it's lamps or flashlights that you're using, those are all things to consider. In terms of the lights as well, you all, or I saw a lot of photos in the Padlet there of shadows that you all were creating with white light. And so you might think about, what kind of light might you want to include in your exhibit, whether it's just using white light, or as you've seen in some of the photos throughout our presentation here, colorful lights can be really fun as well. So when we've set up this exhibit, we've often used 3 different colored lights: red, blue, and green. We've chosen those 3 specific colored lights because those are the primary colors of lights. And so when you mix those light colors together, they create a lot of new colors, right? When you mix those light colors together and start to create shadows, they also create a really interesting effect where the shadows are layered and really colorful as well. So that's, if you want your participants to be exploring different, creating different colored shadows and exploring with colored lights, you might want to consider getting or using 3 different light sources with those 3 different colors as well. Something else to consider as you are thinking about how you might set up this exhibit, or what are the different materials that you might use, right? And so as you all were engaging in your own light and shadow play just a few minutes ago, I hope you noticed that you can use a variety of different objects, common objects, right? That we have easy access to in this type of play, right? So, as you're designing this exhibit, think about what are some, everyday objects, common household items, right? That might create interesting shadows, right? As the participants are engaging. Perhaps, there's some materials that can invite folks to explore now reflection even, right, of light, or refraction as well. Um, so yeah. And so another thing to consider as well are, as you can see on the right side of the screen, are how, do you want to use clips, right? And stands for different objects. So we've noticed, as we've observed participants engaging in this exhibit, is that sometimes it's really helpful to have stands where children and adults can clip on certain objects or certain objects to those stands, so that so it frees up your hands, right, as you're playing and engaging in this exhibit. We don't, when we have those stands, we don't need to use our hands to hold the objects, right? They're being held by the stands. And so then we can use our hands to now explore other objects and other materials in the exhibit. So in the resource guide, there's some information there on how you might build those stands with some common objects as well. So before you launch your exhibits, similar to how you did today, we definitely recommend that you yourself spend some time playing with light and shadow, right? Playing with some of the light sources or some of the objects that you might want to put out for participants to engage in. You yourself playing and exploring the different types of shadows that you can make will really inform you in how you design and set up this exhibit. So with that being said, part of the guide as well has an example of how you might structure your exhibit in different phases. So we've noticed that changing up perhaps the prompts and the materials over the course of several weeks can continue to invite participants to come and engage with the exhibit in different ways, right? It invites participants to kind of extend their explorations as well. So, for example, one way that we've structured this exhibit is through different phases, where phase one for a few weeks, right, is where participants are just using objects, using their hands and bodies to just explore the different shadows that they're making, to explore what happens, when you mix certain light colors, right? What happens to our shadows when we move the light source, or what happens to our shadows when we move the objects, right? Very open. Phase two, now as they've had some experience exploring with the different shadows and different objects that are available to them, we can move now into phase two, where we can now start to use those objects to tell a story, right? And again, it's very open, and it's also a way for both the adult and the child to collaborate together to tell those stories. And now we're kind of heading into phase three, where we're continuing that exploration, right? And perhaps that means now we're telling family stories together of, experiences we've had together as a family. And, how can we recreate that in a shadow story, right? It could also be perhaps, putting out certain materials, like craft materials like paper or pipe cleaners or scissors and tape, where now we're moving away from just using certain objects to create specific shadows, but now moving into, okay, now I can create a specific shape, right, out of pipe cleaners or paper to then create the shadow that I'm envisioning in my head, right? So that phase three is kind of just continuing to extend the other two phases, and to tell stories, and now to use new materials to create our own shadows that we are now kind of envisioning in our heads. So again, you will have access to that, or you should have access to that resource guide in the resources tab at the bottom of your screen, and it has a lot more information in there. So we invite you all to take a look at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Alejandra. And thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your participation. One of the things that we intend to do with this work is to continue designing exhibits, but we also know that each of you in the places where you work and play have opportunities to do just the exact same kind of work, to create an invitation to play for families and for people of many, many different kinds of generations who have stories to tell, who have interesting connections to make, who have relationships to strengthen and build through playful intergenerational STEAM activity. And these exhibits are just one way to do that. The fun thing about them is that they can be placed in community places. One of our great spots here in the Fresno area is in the lobby of the Lighthouse Center for Children. And so as parents come to drop off kids or pick up their kids, there's an opportunity to stop over and play a bit and explore. And it's a wonderful way to incorporate playful learning and engagement with families into their everyday routines. So we encourage you to find a place to install something like this, to do that. We will, again, as Alejandra said, please visit the resources and let us know. You see our emails here. Visit us at aimscenter.org for more resources. You can subscribe to our newsletter, which we send out. We also have a variety of different events that are free. If you'd like to learn about more playful ways to encourage STEAM activity in your communities and in your contexts. And don't forget to visit us at 1 o'clock for a Q&A session. We look forward to seeing you there. And please enjoy the rest of the Early Math Symposium today. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.